I didn't know it at the time, but the first moment they mirrored me, my identity was already compromised. Not my money, not my secrets, my identity. The way I talked, the way I walked, the things I believed about myself, all of it slowly became a weapon that wasn't in my hands anymore. This is the part nobody explains about psychological manipulation. They don't change you. They make you feel like you changed yourself. And that's how the mirror method starts. When I met them, I remember thinking something strange. Why does it feel like I've known them forever? They laughed when I laughed. They reacted exactly how I reacted. They repeated my phrases like we had the same brain. I thought it was compatibility. I thought I got lucky. I thought this person understood me. I didn't know then that mirroring is the first hook, not to attract you, but to map you, to learn your emotional architecture, to find the fractures in your identity, to figure out which version of you they can profit from. The next weeks felt unreal. Every opinion I had, they agreed. Every insecurity I hinted at, they comforted. Every trauma I hinted at, they shared a similar one. Only later I'd realize they copied my exact trauma story back to me. That's when I understood something dark. Mirroring isn't flattery. It's surveillance. And once they finish scanning who you are, they start shaping who you think you are. It was subtle. One day they'd mimic my energy. Next day they'd contradict it. Then they'd reward the version of me they preferred. Then punish the version they didn't. At first I thought I was the one changing. But looking back, I wasn't changing. I was being rewritten. And the scariest part, none of this felt manipulative. It felt familiar, comforting, safe. But that's what the mirror method does. It replaces your reflection before you ever notice it's missing. And the next phase is where the real damage begins. The first sign that something was wrong was silence. They stopped responding the way they used to. No more instant replies. No more matching my tone. No more we're the same person energy. Instead, it became they pull back. I pull forward, they go cold. I go warm, they disconnect. I overthink. And every time I adjusted, they adjusted again, slowly shaping the acceptable version of me. I didn't notice it then, but this is the second phase of the mirror method. Phase 2, identity distortion. They stop mirroring you to watch who you become without it, because that's the version they can control. Once they knew what I feared losing, they learned how to control me. If I said something they liked, they mirrored me again. Warm, engaged, loving, instant gratification. If I said something they didn't, cold tone, short replies, sudden distance, a complete emotional blackout. I didn't know it, but I was being conditioned. Every change in my behavior wasn't a choice. It was a reaction to their approval or silence. They weren't mirroring anymore. I was. The strangest part, they never told me to stop talking to people. Never said cut this friend off. Never demanded anything. But somehow I found myself doing it anyway. Because when I shared my wins with someone else, they became distant. When I spent time with someone else, they went silent. When I mentioned a new friend, they suddenly didn't feel well. It wasn't direct control. It was emotional weather manipulation. They didn't push people out of my life. They made me think I was the one pulling away. Hardest part. I thought I was becoming more focused, more private, more mature. No, I was becoming more isolated. and they were the only consistent reflection left. Here's the moment I realized something was wrong. I heard my own phrases in their mouth, but coming back twisted. Lines I once said with confidence, they repeated with condescension. Stories I once shared vulnerably, they retold with a darker spin. My ambitions, once supported, were now mocked. But worst of all, they started behaving like the version of me that they wanted, not the version I actually was. They weren't mirroring anymore. They were projecting. And projection is the third phase. Phase 3, identity replacement. They install their version of you into you. I started questioning my own opinions. My confidence dipped. My decisions felt shaky. I became dependent on how they reacted to me. They didn't steal my identity. They made me hand it over. The moment everything collapsed wasn't explosive. There was no fight, no chaos, no dramatic confrontation. It was something small, a conversation that felt off, a reaction that didn't match, a weird tension in their voice. Something broke in their script, and for the first time they mirrored the wrong version of me, a version I never showed them. That's when I realized they didn't know me. They only knew the blueprint of the person they built from my reflection. That moment was the beginning of my unraveling. And the part that happened next, the real breakdown, is the one piece of this story I still struggle to talk about publicly. That moment is what became my 7-minute confession recording, and I'll explain why it happened on a regular day. No fight, no trigger, no drama, just a sentence that didn't sound like them. It was too sharp, too rehearsed, too strategically placed, like they were testing me instead of talking to me. And when I didn't react the way they expected, I watched something in their eyes shift, like they had to recalculate the version of me they were supposed to play against. That's when I realized I wasn't in a relationship. I was in a psychological experiment, and my reactions were the data points. My mind started collapsing inward. Every memory felt contaminated. Every emotion felt manufactured. Every part of myself felt borrowed. You know how disturbing it is to hear your own personality coming from someone else's mouth, to hear your humor, your tone, your entire emotional language played back at you like a twisted recording. I remember staring at them and feeling like I was staring at a reflection I didn't recognize. Not them, not me, something in between. That's the psychological damage nobody warns you about. It's not heartbreak. It's identity disorientation, and it hits you in waves. Who am I outside of them? Was I always like this? Did I change, or did they rewire me? What part of me is actually me? Those questions destroy you from the inside. There's a moment in every manipulation cycle where your mind finally rejects the programming. For me, it was the night I tried to talk to them honestly. I told them I felt confused, disconnected, lost inside my own head. And you know what they did? They mirrored it, not to comfort me, not to understand me. They mirrored my breakdown to make it look like they were the ones suffering. Suddenly their voice broke, their breathing changed, their tone collapsed. But it wasn't real. It was a psychological trap. If I focused on their pain, I would ignore my own collapse. That was the moment I felt something inside me tear. A clean, silent mental break. Not a scream, not a panic attack. Just a cold realization. I don't know where I end and they begin. People assume the worst moment was what they did to me. But the truth is darker. The worst moment was realizing what I did to myself to keep them. How much I quieted my voice. How much I softened my boundaries. How much I accepted their version of me because it was easier than facing the silence they weaponized. And when that hit me, I couldn't speak to anyone. Not friends. Not family. No one. So I opened my phone and recorded a voice note. Not scripted. Not structured. Just raw honesty pouring out for the first time after months of mental manipulation. That voice note became the 7-minute confession. It wasn't meant to be public. It wasn't meant to be content. It was the only moment I told the story without protecting them, without protecting myself, without filters, without narrative. Just the truth exactly how it felt at the breaking point. I kept it hidden for a long time because it didn't feel safe to share. But when I created the Mirror Method Black Book, I included that recording not as a product, but as closure. For anyone who has been mirrored, rewritten, and emotionally replaced, that 7-minute confession is the closest thing to hearing your own breaking point spoken out loud. The collapse wasn't the end. It was the first real reflection I had seen in months. Because once you hit the point where your identity fractures, you have two choices: lose yourself completely or rebuild from the ground up. Act IV is how I rebuilt. But the truth is, you never walk out the same person who walked in. The day after the collapse, I woke up feeling like I had stepped out of someone else's life. The silence was too quiet. The world felt colorless. Music didn't hit the same. Food tasted muted. My own voice felt unfamiliar. Identity damage doesn't look like chaos. It looks like numbness. It's the moment you realize your entire personality was shaped around someone who was shaping theirs around you. A psychological hall of mirrors with no real center. And when the reflection breaks, you're left with nothing but fragments. You don't rebuild your identity in one moment. You rebuild it in tiny, painful steps. A boundary you finally hold. A truth you finally say out loud. A thought that isn't influenced by their tone or presence. A decision you make without imagining how they'd react. And the hardest part, learning how to be yourself without an audience. Because when someone mirrored you for long enough, your brain becomes addicted to external validation loops. It's neurological, not emotional. That's why escaping the mirror method feels like withdrawal. Not from the person, but from the reflection they built for you. There were moments I almost went back. Not because I missed them, but because I missed the version of myself they made me believe existed. That understood version. That compatible version. That deep connection version. But that version was created to control me. And returning to it would have been returning to a personality that wasn't mine. People don't fall back into manipulation because they're weak. They fall back because identity loss makes the familiar feel safer than freedom. That's why so many people stay stuck. When I finally had distance, I started writing down the signs I missed. Not to blame myself, but to understand the architecture of what happened to me. It started as scattered notes, then patterns, then behaviors, then the cycles. Those notes eventually became the 77 specific signs that build the full pattern of the mirror identity trap. Patterns I wish someone showed me before I walked straight into them. Patterns I put into the mirror method black book not as a guide, but as a warning system for anyone who is being rewritten and doesn't realize it yet. But that's not the real lesson. The real lesson is this. Your identity is the first thing manipulators study and the last thing they steal. The day I listened back to that 7-minute voice note, I didn't recognize the person speaking. Shaking voice, broken confidence, confused map of reality. But it wasn't shameful. It was a timestamp. A record of the exact moment I decided to stop being a reflection of someone else. And I included that confession not to dramatize the story, but to give people something I didn't have at that moment. A voice that tells you you're not crazy, you're not overreacting, you're not too sensitive. You're being psychologically rewritten. And once you see the pattern, you can finally break it. So if you've ever felt like you were losing pieces of yourself around someone, pay attention. Mirroring is not innocent. It's not chemistry. It's not soul connection. It's the quiet reprogramming of your identity wrapped inside familiarity. The mirror method is real. And once it gets inside you, it takes everything to get yourself back. But you can rebuild. You can recover. And you can reclaim the reflection that was always yours.